right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and appreciate y'all sticking around. Those that are joining us on YouTube, we welcome you here today with us, and those on Facebook, we appreciate y'all joining us. And but I tell you what, are y'all ready to hear the next part of what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago? I have some stuff that you probably want to stick around to and listen, because it all really ties on together. So let me give you a quick rundown of what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, because you probably don't even remember. You're like, oh, what did you talk about? All right, so I was talking about identifying the time of judgment. Well, I don't think you have to go very far to be able to open up our eyes to really see, what's happening around us. But I mentioned the fact that when you translate the name Biden, which is in Hebrew Badon, means a last judgment, a last judgment. And I don't think that things just happen and that people's names or times or events just happen just because they do. Sometimes the Father, in his infinite wisdom, embeds things in our current events so that we can also have a better idea what's going on, and we're without excuse. And it's only for those that, if you're going to be kingly, if we're going to be priest and king, then we're going to search out a matter. Amen? Okay, so go with me real quickly over to Ezekiel chapter 14, verses 12 through 23, because this is really the foundation where we're going to go from. And beginning with Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 12, then the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, if a country sins against me by committing unfaithfulness, and I stretched out my hand against it, destroy its supply of bread, send famine against it, and cut off from it both man and beast, even though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in its midst, by their own righteousness they can only deliver themselves, declares Yahweh Elohim. If I were to cause wild beasts to pass through the land, and they depopulated it, and it became so desolate so that no one could pass through it because of the beasts, though these three men were in its midst, as I live, declares Yahweh Elohim, they could not deliver either their sons or their daughters. They alone could be delivered, but the country would be desolate. Or if I should bring a sword on that country and say, let the sword pass through the country and cut off men and beasts from it, even though these three men were in its midst, as I live, declares Yahweh Elohim, they could not deliver either their sons or their daughters, but they alone would be delivered. Or if I should send a plague against that country and pour out my wrath and blood on it to cut off man and beast from it, even though Noah, Daniel, and Job are in its midst, as I live, declares Yahweh Elohim, they could not deliver either their sons or their daughters. They could deliver only themselves by their righteousness. Verse 21, for thus says Yahweh Elohim, how much more when I send my 4 severe judgments against Jerusalem, sword, famine, wild beasts, and plague, to cut off man and beast from it. Yet behold, survivors will be left in it, who will be brought out, both sons and daughters. Behold, they are going to come forth to you, and you will see their conduct and actions. Then you will be comforted for their calamity, which I have brought against Jerusalem, for everything which I brought upon it. Then they will comfort you when you see their conduct and actions, for you will know that I have not done in vain whatever I did to it, declares Yahweh Elohim. So, tying that connection together, what are there 4 different things? Sword, famine, wild beasts, and plague. All right, remember those 4 things. Sword, famine, wild beasts, and plague. And jumping over to the 4th seal, Revelation chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. When the Lamb broke the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, Come. I looked and beheld an ashen horse, or a green horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by the wild beasts of the earth. Do you see a theme going on? So we've got these 4 judgments, which go along with paralleling the 4th seal coming at the end of the age. And so I asked the question, why do these things come? What are these? These are judgments, and they're judgments upon a land who has turned its back on Yahweh. And it says that even though you've got men of such high regard as Daniel, Job, and Noah living in the land, that he would not deliver the land in spite of those guys living there. So what does that make you think? It seems like a very serious thing, doesn't it? It seems like a very serious time we're living in, and considering the time that we've got a person that's been installed into the highest office of this land with the name of a last judgment, then we must understand that there must be something going on that the Father's getting our attention. Now, I also want to bring out some things because these really tie into current events. But before I go into current events, I want us to understand that during the time of President Trump, it's amazing all of the stuff that stopped happening. It stopped happening in this land. It stopped happening around the world. And yet, in the last year of President Trump, we saw, beginning around March the 20th, 2020, all sorts of acceleration of things that we thought we would see. I thought, I don't know about anybody else, that it wouldn't happen so quickly, but we saw a gradual, I thought it might be a gradual, like moving into the beast system, and yet in 1 year, the beast system has been rolled out upon us. Okay, that's where we are. On the prophetic timeline, it's like, wake up, smell the coffee, we're here, we're right in the middle of it. We talked about Noah's character. What is it about Noah's character is what the word says about him is that he was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. Number one characteristic that we need to have. We need to be blameless and walk with Elohim. Daniel's character. It was said of him by an angel who said to Daniel, "O Daniel, man of high esteem." Understand the words I'm about to tell you. "And stand upright, for I have now been sent to you." And when he spoke these words to me, I stood up trembling. Basically, when the presence of this angel showed up, the power of God knocked him over. So I'm just saying, he was overwhelmed with the presence that this angel that came from the throne room of God brought with him. And so he says, stand up. But he was a man of high esteem. Job's character. Job 1:1 says there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. So do you see a theme between those characters? So be thinking about what type of character is Yahweh bringing to us right now? Or what type of character do we need to have to be able, let me say it this way, to survive the day and the hour that we're living in? And what's so important about living in the day and the hour that we're living in is that we are powerless to survive without having the character like Job, Noah, and Daniel. Okay? I spoke about the judgment that came upon the earth with during the time of Noah, and then the promise that Yah brought at the end of that time. Now, I want to say this: when there's a time of judgment, this is why people say, "Oh, I don't want to hear about a time of judgment. I don't want to hear these things because I deal with enough problems and pressures in my life." I want you to understand is that with a time of judgment, there is an arc. So if we turn off and we're not listening about these things about the character and about the time of judgment, we may not understand how the arc plays out. We all have an arc. Do you agree? We have an arc. If it happened for Noah, and if there's no discrimination between people in Yahweh's eyes, that we're all in the same boat, so to speak, no pun intended, that he will provide an ark for us. And so I wanted to get to these things. So we have a judgment that came upon the earth. That was in the last message. We know about the judgment that came, but the judgment speaks to a pattern of escape. Now, the church out there is looking for a pattern of a rapture type of escape. Okay? But Noah wasn't raptured. He was fully involved in his own escape. Yahweh worked with him, showed him how it should be done, and gave him great favor in putting it together, but he participated with Yahweh, and eventually Yahweh closed the door and sealed him in. Okay, so that pattern of protection is in every judgment. So, keep that in mind. Now, here's the next thing. Who feels powerless to the things that are happening around the earth right now? And when we look at the current events that are taking place and we say, Oh God, if you would just put in the right person, and if you would simply remove these evil people, then it would be all over, and we would have a good life, right? Do you ever feel that way? It's like, if you would just move this guy whose name is a last judgment, I think, wouldn't we just feel better about things? Okay? But here's the thing. Those that have been placed in those kingly roles also have a greater judgment that's placed upon them, because what they do and the oppression they bring upon a people, we say what goes around comes around, but the law of reciprocity does affect them. I know in the world they say, karma. I don't use that term, but if someone's listening, they're like, speak my language. Well, the law of reciprocity in worldly terms would be, what do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And so if they're doing this unto us and they are separated from it eventually from what affects us, then God will bring it about to affect them. Okay, let's go on. How do we know this? Because the word talks about this. Because in Daniel it talks about the king's judgment. Okay, think about the king's judgment. There's prophetic insight into this. Daniel 1 verse 2. Here's the first kingly judgment during Daniel's time. And it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Yehuda, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and besieged it. Yahweh gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. So judgment came upon a wicked king. So just think about this. A foreign land invaded and took the leadership into captivity. Judgment of the king. King's judgment. Think about it. We're going to get there. All right. Here's another judgment. Remember the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had? He needed interpretation, and the top part was gold, and then it was silver, and then it was brass, and then it was iron, and then it was, all these different levels. Well, what were those? Those were speaking about kingdoms, glorious kingdoms. But because of the evil that they had done, each one of those kingdoms historically had been destroyed. You can go back and research your own history on that, as in terms of the Babylonian kingdom, the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, going through the list. All of those kingdoms no longer exist. Going all the way down to the Roman Empire, it's been destroyed. And now we're to the final kingdom, that is the brass and the iron and the clay, which shall be destroyed as well. So here's another example in Daniel. The king Nebuchadnezzar had a pride issue. Would you agree with me on that? No. So let's go over to Daniel chapter 3, verses 8 through 18, where it reads, for this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You yourself, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image. Well, who is the golden image of? King Nebuchadnezzar, right? But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these 3 men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of that horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I've made, very well. But if you will not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? Now, I want to ask you this question. What are the stuff that we've been hearing right now in this nation? If you are a believer, if if you're conservative, if you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in the Bible, if you are pro-life, you name it, we are represented in this place, right? And what do they want to do with us? What have they said? They said that they want to gather us, they want to send us to re-education camps, and if we can't be re-educated, they want to exterminate us. In fact, it's been confirmed. Steve Quayle was talking about the confirmation of I think at one point, now correct me if I'm wrong, 250,000 guillotines? Have y'all heard that? I mean, there's a whole bunch of guillotines that they have stationed, and they've moved across the United States. Eyewitnesses have seen these guillotines. Why do you need guillotines? And by the way, in the National Defense Authorization Act, that they actually put in a line that execution by guillotine is now permissible. Did you know that? So why the guillotine? Why not a bullet? Why not electrocution? That type of thing? Well, it's because it's very quick and it's very efficient, and dead is dead. Okay, so they want to bring about this rollout. But what is it about us as believers need to be concerned about? Why do they want to cause us as believers to bow down to their beast system? Is that not what happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They bow down to the beast system, bow down to the king, bow down to his image, follow his orders, do what you're told to do, and you'll be able to live. Now, we as believers need to get our mindset into the position that if we're faced with that, and if things happen so quickly in 2020, by which we saw all sorts of things that changed and reversals up to the point of an election that took place like it did, we think, how could this ever happen in America, and in a Supreme Court that would not even uphold the laws of the land to do what's right, to uphold justice? How could that ever happen in America? Have you ever said to yourself, this can never happen in America? And yet here we are living it right now. So the expectation is that the things that are coming upon the earth are going to shake our faith. My question is our faith unshakable? So if we're having unshakable faith, look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What prepared them to be in the position that they were in to face the wrath of the king, by which they would be thrown into the fiery furnace? Faith. There's a faith, and faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, right? There's something that's resonating right now, even within this congregation among believers in the United States, and it is about this thing about how do we show ourselves to have a firm foundation? How do we show ourselves that we are going deeper, we're anchored deeper, that we are a tree that's immovable, unshakable? Isn't there a song, immovable, unshakable? Okay, all right, so the roots go down deep. That's right. So Jonathan actually was talking about what he thought we should have as a theme for Sukkot, and he said, going down deeper and anchored, or something like that. And which is we need to go down deeper. We need to find when a tree is in a drought, what happens to the roots? The roots go deeper. They're looking for that water source. They're trying to find that, unless it is a mulberries. Mulberries. Those roots go to the surface and they're looking for any of that top water level. Okay, that's totally different. But if you're an oak tree and you're going to go down deep, you're going to go down deep, try to find that water source. Okay, moving right along. We need to be thinking about this. I'm telling you, this is so practical. What in our lifestyle right now is preventing our roots from going deeper? What is it in our lifestyle right now that is actually causing us to dry up? What is it right now in our lifestyle that we need to face and confront, because it is now an obstacle to our faith pressing in and pressing through? Maybe it's become a barrier between us and the Father. Think about those things. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not heed to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. That is a statement probably worth memorizing. And, by the way, guess what? To be absent from the body is to be present from the Lord. So just think, you know what? If you got to face the guillotine, we're just getting there quicker. All right? So it can't hurt us. It can't. Yeah, that's right. Man cannot steal our soul. So what is it about this judgment that's actually pronounced by the king upon them? What happened? How did it turn around? How did their stance for what was right, by not bowing down to an image, how did it play out? And as you know, you can read the rest of the story. And verse 25, he says, they were thrown into the fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar was astounded and stood up with haste. He responded, verse 24, he responded and said to his high officials, was it not 3 men cast bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, certainly, O king. He answered and said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm. Hallelujah. Say without harm. Without harm. That's right. And the appearance of the 4th is like the son of, my version says, of God's. So they said it's like the Son of Man right there. The Son of God right there, walking in their midst. So just think about this. I want to say, if there is a judgment that's coming upon the land, if we are walking upright and blameless, then is there an ark? Yeah. Is there a 4th man in the fire? Yes. Is there a way of escape? Yes. Yes. What happens to a king that exalts himself? Well, shall we read on? The king, over in Daniel 4, verse 30, his judgment after this took place, he says, the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. But let's look at another judgment that took place. Go to chapter 4, verse 28. Leading up to this, Daniel, the king Nebuchadnezzar has another vision. And so Daniel gives him an answer to that vision, and this is over in 4:24 and 25. This is the interpretation, O king. This is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king, that you be driven from mankind, and your dwelling place be with the beasts of the field, and you be given grass to eat like cattle, and be drenched with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. What happens a few verses down, verse 28? All this happened. So this is King Nebuchadnezzar, who is very prideful, who is raising up his beast system. Everybody's got to bow down to it. Everybody's got to follow along. You got to be in lockstep with what they said. Otherwise, you don't deserve to be part of it. And so now, verse 28, all this happened to Nebuchadnezzar the king. 12 months later, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. The king reflected, and here comes the judgment. And is not this Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence, by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty? And while the word was in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven, saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, sovereignty has been removed from you. And you will be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field. You will be given grass to eat like cattle, and 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler of the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. And say immediately. Immediately the word concerning Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from mankind and began eating grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like birds' claws. And at the end of the period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lived forever. Just think about this. It doesn't matter what beast system's out there, it will be driven. Every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Yeshua is Yahweh. Amen? Well, there was another king that's mentioned in the book of Daniel that faced judgment, and that's over in Daniel chapter 5, beginning verse 22. And it was his son, Belshazzar. Okay? It says, yet you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. But you exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you. You and your nobles, your wives, your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see, hear, or understand, but the God in whose name are your life breath in all your ways you have not glorified. Then the hand was sent from him, and this inscription written out. Now this is the inscription that was written out. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And the interpretation of the message is, first off, Mene means to number. So to number, to weigh, and to divide. That's what those words are. Direct interpretation, translation. This is the interpretation, verse 26 of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and has put an end to it. Tekel, or Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Perez, the kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. Then, verse 29, Belshazzar gave orders. They clothed Daniel with purple, put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third ruler of the kingdom. That same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. Judgment came upon a king that exalted himself above the knowledge of God. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. So, you see a pattern going on here? This is why we as believers say, if there's judgments that are coming on the earth, if there's judgments that we are facing, that we're seeing all these things, I'm telling you, it's not just America. Just think about what's happening in Canada right now. The lockdown in Canada is much greater than what's going on here in the United States. But think about what's happening in Europe. It's the same thing going on in Europe, in Australia, all sorts of places, New Zealand, other nations in the world. Jerusalem or Israel is worse than everyone. They have accelerated the process by which you can, they're inoculating people. And if you don't get the inoculation, you can't work. And if you can't work, you're not going to get a paycheck. And if you're not getting a paycheck, then you cannot participate in commerce. So what Sissy just said is that she's been praying for Israel, and last night she saw Israel just cracking and crumbling because of the things that are happening there. So that's very interesting. All right, so think about these different things. The last sign of Daniel is in Matthew 24:15, and Yeshua is speaking about this, and this command occurs right before the people are told to flee. So think about, if you're putting things on a timeline, this will be fulfilled, and then will be the time to flee. So Matthew 24, verses 15 through 22, it reads, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. That's really the key point that I wanted to bring out on that. Let the reader understand. So when you see this, when it's spoken by Daniel, that was said that would, according to Daniel the prophet, Let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to get the things out that are in the house. Let him who's in the field not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are with child and those who nurse babes in those days. But pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation. See, it says, for then, so the abomination of desolation comes, and then there will be great tribulation. Such has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever shall. So, how does this pattern play out to where we've seen it before, or how can we get a better understanding of this? Is that it is a pattern that takes place during a time by which a king would be elevated, or shall we say a system of government which would be elevated. But first, before I go into that part, let's look at something. Remember, in the first Exodus, there was a Pharaoh. There was a judgment that was placed upon this Pharaoh, and this judgment that was placed upon him was to do what? What am I saying about judgment? They were plagues, right? 10 plagues that were placed upon Pharaoh and upon his nation. And what were the purposes of those plagues? That is to show that the gods of Egypt were not greater than Yahweh Elohim, right? There is none greater. And it was basically to say even Pharaoh could not stop it because he was considered to be a god, correct? But he would not listen until finally the death of his firstborn, when the death angel passed over. Okay? So, Pharaoh, think about this, is likened unto Leviathan. Pharaoh is likened unto Leviathan. I want you to go with me over to Ezekiel chapter 29, verses 3 through 6. Speak and say, thus says Yahweh Elohim, behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great monster that lies in the midst of his rivers, that has said, my Nile is mine, and I myself have made it. And I shall put hooks in your jaws, and I shall make the fish of your rivers cling to your scales, and I will bring you up out of the midst of your rivers, and all the fish of your rivers will cling to your scales. Verse 5, and I shall abandon you to the wilderness, you and all your fish of your rivers. You will fall on the open field, and you will not be brought together or gathered. I have given you for food to the beasts of the earth and to the birds of the sky. Then all the inhabitants of Egypt will know that I am Yahweh, because they have been only a staff made of reed to the house of Israel. What is he talking about there? Well, let's look at another connecting point, and that is over in Psalm 74:14. Leviathan is a multi-headed beast. Yahweh pronounces judgment on. So go with me over to Psalm chapter 74. It's a multi-headed beast. Psalm 74:14. Thou didst crush the heads of Leviathan. Thou didst give him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. Now, if Pharaoh is likened unto Leviathan, a multi-headed creature that is in the river, what happened to Pharaoh and his armies? Are we talking about a sea creature, a sea monster? Are we talking about a beast that is exalting itself against the people of Yahweh? So what happened to those? What was it? It was Pharaoh and his armies, multi-headed, right? Lots of troops, that type of thing. They are serpent-like because when they go in martial array, chasing after the Hebrews, they're in a line. They're not just in a big old swarm, right? They go to the Red Sea, a river, and what happens? They go into the Red Sea after Israel, in which they get stuck. Their chariot wheels fall off. They get all sorts of problems, and they die, and their bodies get washed up on the seashore, and what happens? They become food for the beasts of the field in the wilderness. So there you go. What happens to an evil king? An evil king and the evil king system, even though it's multi-headed, I can name some names of the heads of a multi-headed beast in our nation, as well as the heads of many other nations that are all together in lockstep with the same program. And though they look evil and though they look wicked, they shall be destroyed. So we fear not the beast, right? Fear not the beast. Let's look at something real quick as well that really goes along with this, and let's look at Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. See, the people, in Daniel it says, the people who know their God shall do great exploits. The problem is that when believers hear about the times of judgment, we cringe and we say, I don't want to go through something like this. This is going to be painful. It's going to hurt. And that we're not recognizing that we're the people of Yah. Right. Why did we ever think that we are not to be, we think about Daniel, Job, and Noah, and these are men of high esteem. But think about this. If we're a people of God that study His Word out, and we're studying Torah, and we're studying the very things that Noah taught Shem, and Shem taught Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then are we not following in their footsteps? And so was there not a place and a hand that delivered them, or a place that they were delivered to, but a hand, the outstretched mighty hand of God that took them out of the land of Egypt, out of a place where they were subjected to the gods of that land? All right. Revelation chapter 12 is where we have the sign of the woman, and where it says, the great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, and she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, behold, a great dragon, having a bunch of heads, 7 heads. Do we see a parallel going on here? 10 that had 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadems. And his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood up before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. A multi-headed beast that pursues the people of God. Because think about the time of the abomination, the desolation, flee. And so the beast system doesn't want the people to flee because they want to destroy. That's what the beast system does, to destroy. And how's it want us destroyed? By sword, by famine, by pestilence, right? By all these different things. These are plagues. All right, so now moving on, Revelation chapter 12, let's go down a little bit further. Verse 11, and they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even to death. All right, so you can follow Torah, but if you don't have the blood of the Lamb, you'll not overcome. You can have the blood of the Lamb, but if you don't follow Torah, the word of the testimony, you're not going to overcome. They have to work together. So my Christian brothers and sisters that are watching on YouTube right now, that if you're saying, well, I don't have to follow the Old Testament, that's old, it's been done away with, you're wrong. Because in the New Testament it says that you have to have the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony, and they did not love their life even unto death. The word of the testimony, you got to go back to the Torah in the first 5 books to find out what the word of the testimony is. That was set there by the Ark of the Covenant. We're told to keep it, to read it, to understand it, to live it. It's not under the law. It's the perfect law of liberty. So That's how we're set free. That's how we live in freedom. Okay, moving on. Verse 12. For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, and knowing that he is only a short time. Okay, how many people have understood, have seen this, that since, what was it, January 20th? And they had the fake inauguration. I say fake inauguration because they even started it before the time. And so they put this person into position, and immediately, what happened that day? One executive order after the next executive order was taking place, that everything, that over 50 executive orders now, reversing all the things that President Trump had done. And what is it? What are some examples? Like they're saying that biological males who call themselves females can now participate in female sports. And there's a lot of young women that are getting destroyed. They're getting hurt, injured, because guys who are growing their hair out long, because they can't compete in the male sports, now they're taking over the women's sport. And they say it's okay. Right? That's what's happening. There's a whole bunch of other things that are taking place, but that's just one example. So we think about all of these things that are evil, accelerated. Why do they want to do these things so quickly? Obama didn't have these things happen so quickly. He spread it out over 8 years. Okay? Because the devil's time is short. They're trying to stop and reverse anything and everything. It's about control, it's about power, and it's about for you to put upon you and me fear. Has God given us the spirit of fear? No, but that of power, love, and a sound mind. So, during this day and this hour that we're living in, there's no greater time that we as a people need to walk in discernment than any other time. We cannot be deceived, and so therefore, and I'm speaking to myself about this, more time needs to be spent in the prayer closet than on the headlines. Okay? I'm telling you, there's so many things that are happening so quickly and in such volume, to keep up with it, it's really hard. But that time takes away from the prayer closet. Yes. But if we go first into the prayer closet, then we'll know what headlines that we need the Holy Spirit to lead us to, so we know how to discern the times we're living in. Okay? In verse 13, and when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. And the 2 wings of the great eagle was given to the woman in order that she might fly into the wilderness to her place. So what is a flying into the wilderness? Well, you know what? If there's not like a departure from the United States by which we travel, and it really makes a lot of sense that way, what Eddie and Tammy were talking about when we did that conference, I'd sure like it to be a flight that we're just translated into the place of the Har Moedim, not Armageddon, but Har Moedim, which is the place or the mountain of the feast, which is Mount Sinai. That's where I believe is the gathering of the bride of Messiah in the place of the wilderness, to her place where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth. So here's a metaphor. After the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. So what is the water? When we see water within Scripture, we think about chaos and confusion, but it also speaks about people, like perhaps an army being spewed out from the beast that is trying to sweep up the people of God in a flood, so that the people of God will be swept away, destroyed by this army. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. The earth opened up, the armies fell in. Have we seen the earth open up before to take out the enemies of God? Yes. By Korath, right? And the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Yeshua. So, now, why do we have 2 groups? We have the group that overcame them because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives even unto death. And then we have the other one, which is who are not pursued, but they keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Yeshua. It sounds like the same group of people, but separated. Well, doesn't the parable of the virgins talk about two different groups of people that are separated? One enters into a place of protection, and the other one didn't have enough oil, so they had to go and buy oil. And then when they got the oil, they found out that their way of escape had been closed. So think about that. Now they're following Torah, but they missed the door. I'm going to move on to the next part. Isn't that interesting, though? Do you see how this is all connecting? So this whole thing about Daniel, Noah, and Job is very, very interesting. Let's talk about Job for a second, because in Job, we see the judgment of Satan. Now, I'm not going to go over the judgment of Satan at this point in time. We may do it at a later time. But I do want to say this. What was it about Job that we see? And ultimately, Job, who was attacked by Satan, has everything restored to him. Okay? So, let's look at Job chapter 1, verse 7. And Yahweh said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Then Satan answered Yahweh and said, "From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it." And Yahweh said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." Then Satan answered Yahweh, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Hast thou not made a hedge about him and his house, and all that he has on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth thy hand now, and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse thee to thy face." And then then Yahweh said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not put forth your hand on him." So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. Then we see he loses everything he has. There's a storm that hits. There's raiders that come and attack. His everything that he has is destroyed and taken away from him. The only thing that remains is his health. And then even his life is spared, but even his health is taken from him because he gets boils all over his body. I mean, that's in a bad position, right? But hold on to that. When we see that, and we see this wrath of Hasatan that's being poured out upon Job, there is a remedy, and that's over in Deuteronomy 32:35, which says, "Vengeance is mine, and retribution in due time their foot will slip. For the day of their calamity is near, and the impending things are hastening upon them." I believe that was a prophetic word, and I think that prophetic word has not only been from past generations, but I believe that prophetic word is for our generation, an end-time generation. So when we look at this and we look at all the different things that are taking place and identifying the time of judgment and seeing that these plagues are coming upon the earth and that wrath is poured out against the bride of Messiah and the body of Messiah, understanding there's two different things. The bride and the body are one, but let me put it in terms of the wedding. There's the bride and there's the wedding guests, and then there's the servants. They're all there, but not everybody's the bride. Okay, with that said, how do we put this together? And how do we look at this and considering these things? Go with me over to Jeremiah chapter 29. Now, one of these verses you're familiar with, but let's start with verse 10. "For thus says Yahweh, when 70 years have been completed for Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you to bring you back to this place." Okay, I want to ask you something. In terms of the timeline, what have we said about the time of Babylon? It's going to be 70 years, right? And that March of 2020 was the final year of Babylon. Because in 1950, if you go back, we know that Israel was formed as a nation in 1949. In 1950, we see that there was a union put together of the NATO nations, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It began in 1950, and I think it was put into place by 1951. And when you go 70 years from that date, you end up in the year 2020, which takes you to the final year of 70. And that when that time takes place, for thus says Yahweh, when 70 years have been completed for Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you and bring you back to this place. So I want to ask you this. Is that a prophetic word to that generation? Yes. Is that a prophetic word to our generation? Could we be looking at a fulfillment of time based on a Babylonian system that would come to an end and then they would bring it to an end? And this is what Klaus Schwab has been calling the Great Reset. The Great Reset, where they want to reset the financial system, they want to reset the governing organizations of the world, where they're going to take out all the small businesses, let there be big corporate businesses that we have to do business with. They want to do it through medical tyranny, by which they want everybody to be inoculated, to get a COVID pass, be able to buy or sell. That's basically what it's turned into. That's what happened and began in 2020. And we saw judgment begin to pour out upon the land because many people that were affected in their finances, many people were affected in their health, and many people were affected in so many different ways. But more than anything, people were locked in their homes. People are committing suicide at greater rates than ever before. People are coming to face saying, where did our freedoms go? People are being arrested for not wearing masks in different countries around the world, or even having their masks fall below their nose. So what is this tyranny that's going on? Well, it is now an end of one system and a beginning of a new system. And we've seen the first realm of judgment being placed upon people of this world. And now the second round of judgment is about to start, because on March the 20th, 2021, is the completion of the full 70 years. So, what's it say to us as believers? Verse 11. Well, in verse 10, I will visit you. What happened during the Babylonian captivity under Daniel? At the end of 70 years, Daniel was prayed and was reminded of this, the prophetic word of Jeremiah, saying at the end of 70 years that the time of the exile would be over and they would be released. So Daniel began to pray that they would and repent, not only for the sins of Judah that got them there in the first place, but for all the tribes of Israel. But Yahweh, it says, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you to bring you back, saying, he's talking to people in exile, to bring you back to this place. To bring you back to this place. I will visit you. So during a time where it seems like everything's going rough and we see plagues being put upon the earth and upon us as a people, what is that for us as believers? Yahweh saying, I will visit you. I will visit you. So when we have been praying, and how many times do we pray and we say, oh God, hear my voice, and we feel like the heavens are brass and we feel like there's no answers like we need to hear? What is happening? He says, I will visit you. Is everything okay?
I need googly eyes.
Okay. Let's look at, I will bring you back to this place, but look at the promise. For I know the plans I have for you. Do you know this verse? But do you know that this verse is particularly connected to the greater exile, to the return of the lost tribe of Israel from the four corners of earth? Okay. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares Yahweh, plans for welfare, not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. So judgment that comes upon the earth is against the beast system. The judgments that are taking place is not us, it's them. Plans for welfare, not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Then, say then, you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. And you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. And I will be found by you, declares Yahweh, and I will restore your fortunes and will gather you from the nations, and from all the place where I have driven you, declares Yahweh. I will bring you back to the place from where I sent you into exile. We said that the exile was over in 2009, 2010. If you look at the calculation of the years and that type of thing, the exile was over there. But have we been called back? I believe in the last several years, since 2009, 2010, we've been experiencing some of the greatest visitations of Yahweh in the earth. Now, have we seen the awakenings that we want and a great revival and people coming to Yahweh and healings and deliverances and all that type of thing that we've known in terms of awakenings in the past? I think more than anything else is that there has been a drawing of the lines between those who are believers and those who are not. Those who are just playing the game and those who are just that are just playing the game and those who are serious about it. Okay? There is a differentiation between the two. And this is why when these plagues come, when the sword, when the famine, when the beast, when all these things are being released upon the earth, why do they do that? Is because it is leverage to do one thing. What will get God's people to pray? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me. Why will we call upon him? Because we need to pray. What is going to cause God's people to pray? And I'm telling you now, when we've had the Amarillo House of Prayer, the International House of Prayer of Amarillo, and people stopped coming. When it was over on Bottom Street, when it was over there on Western, why are people not praying? Because people don't see the significance of prayer. And let me ask you this, what about fasting? I know some people are fasting in this congregation right now. What is enough to lodge us to the point that we're going to say, I've got to pray now. Now I've got to make spending time with Yahweh more important than reading headlines or anything else that's going on. Well, I'm going to include fasting in this because I need God to do something to leverage the circumstances, the situation, because he promised that he is going to visit me. And he promised that he is going to fulfill his good word to bring me back to this place, but I'm still here. And Israel is worse off than it ever has been because they're pushing the vaccination and they're locking people down. They're not allowing them to work over there. And it doesn't seem like they're opening the doors, even though they know that there's 10 lost tribes of Israel scattered in the four corners of the earth, and they want to make a place for them, and yet there's no political provision for it at this point in time. What needs to take place, what needs to happen, except that God's people will begin to call out to him, that they will call and he will answer because they're going to be serious about it this time. Are we going to be serious about that thing? And it says, and you will seek me and find me, and you search for me with all your heart, and I will be found by you, declares Yahweh, and I will restore your fortunes, and I will gather you from all the nations, from all the places where I've driven you, declares Yahweh. So there's a beast, and he's multi-headed, and he's out there, but judgment's coming upon that king. Judgment's coming. This system is not bigger than Yahweh. We may be in the midst of it, but this dissatisfaction that we feel, and all we want to do is say, we want to shake our fists at Washington, D.C., or London, or Berlin, or wherever their capital is around the world where the people are at, and they say, you're just not being nice to your people. Well, guess what? It's not that we should be shaking our fists that direction. Rather than we're saying, oh God, if you don't move, we're dead. My family's dead. My children are dead. My grandchildren, I'll have no progeny. Okay? If we do not call out to him. So something's got to happen to motivate us to really pray. Something's got to happen to motivate us to really get things moving in our lives. Okay. So, are y'all with me? Did I lose anybody yet? All right. Some of these things getting tied together for you, hopefully making some sense, maybe understanding the times that we're living in, and specifically identifying the time of judgment. But I'm going to share some things in the next few minutes, and we'll be dismissed because it's about that time. I want to share some things with you about what's happening right now in the earth. These are things that Yahweh is just starting to get our attention to. But I'm telling you, what should we expect after the 20th of March? What should we expect after the 20th of March? If there's this calendar that's going on, and why that day is not a biblical calendar, well, I'm going to tell you that some of the things that are taking place is because the beast system operates off of a Babylonian calendar, and we need to understand that there's a biblical calendar and then there's the Babylonian calendar. There's two different systems going on. We must verse ourselves and understand them both. Very important. Understanding the cycles and the times and the feast days of Yahweh, but understanding that the enemy works off of a particular calendar as well. And Babylon just speaks about mixing. They're going to mix the biblical calendar in with the Babylonian calendar because it is an umbrella of everything going on in the earth so that everybody feels like everybody's included. All inclusive, unless you're a believer in Yahweh. Okay? All right, so here's some things that are taking place. In Italy, have you seen that Mount Etna has been exploding? Okay? 4 major eruptions. The 4th one that happened last Sunday, the first day of the week, was enormous, huge. Why is that happening? Because underneath Italy, we've been told to watch Italy. Italy is a hot spot, literally, magma, all this stuff. The caldera under Italy is 10 to 12 times the size of Yellowstone. Everybody's so afraid of Yellowstone going on. Nothing's going to be happening in Yellowstone. Okay? The big one to watch is Italy, because when this caldera goes off, but what's going on there is huge to the point. There's another, I was going to say that it's like the 9th largest volcanic system in our solar system, but it's not. There's one that's over in Southeast Asia, is number 9. This one is still huge. Italy, they say that when this thing completely goes wild in Italy with this volcano, it will destroy most of Italy. It'll, including the Vatican. It's going to destroy, it'll be uninhabitable. They said the people will begin to flee Italy. They're going to go into Libya. They're going to go into Egypt. Egypt is probably going to block them with military action. The people won't be able to flee there, but they'll be moving into North Africa, spreading out. Italy is going to be a nation of refugees. That's how big it is, and this is how bad it is. This is how bad it's getting, because the earth is heating up at its core, and the earth is expanding. And so it's opening up fractures and fissures and fault lines like never before. The tectonic plate movement is unlike anything in history that's taking place right now. And we're saying, I don't feel anything under Amarillo, but we had a 2-point-something earthquake this week in Tulia, by the way. It's very interesting. So in Italy, there's steam cracks opening up. Magma is building up underneath Italy that is beyond comprehension. So keep an eye out for this. There are problems with their runways. Where you take off your airplane, there's problems because they're starting to crack up. Infrastructures. In the underground infrastructures, they're having all sorts of issues, and it's getting hot, even in those tunnels and the sewer systems and all the different things that they run underground. Maybe subways, I don't know if they got subways over there or not, but whatever they got, they're having problems. So it is heating up, it's building up. Next thing is over in Iraq on, I believe it's March the 6th, that the Pope is going and he's holding a big event called the Prayer for the Sons of Abraham. And so all the religions of the world are invited except for the Jews. I guess they're not part of the Sons of Abraham. But I say that tongue in cheek. So, because I'll say that, somebody will say, well, John said that the Jews are not the Sons of Abraham. No, I'm not. I didn't say that. Okay. So they're being gathered, many Christian denominations are being gathered there, and they're going to pray. And where they're going to pray, it's at Ziggurat. And Ziggurat is, what's so important about that? Because it's been chosen, because ziggurats were placed and built in a position on earth because it represents an open heaven. It represents a portal to speak, to pray to the different dimensions. This is why they're praying there. Now, it's been said, Mike from around the world was talking about this, and he says he believes, and we should watch for it. I'm not saying he's saying something prophetic or anything. I'm simply reporting that when they go to do this thing, it is an abomination. It's not abomination of desolation, but it is an abomination. And when this happens, expect earth changes. Yes, thank you. It is expect earth changes. So why? Because it is believed that places that have ziggurats, pyramids, these different sites that create an open door, open portal by which they can have access through the dimensions, they're called influential lands. And that when they pray, they are believing that they will receive help from the land from where they are gathering together. That's not us. This is not biblical. This is what they believe. And of course, we know that the Pope does not have a biblical faith. And it is also to unite all of the all the religions of the world under one umbrella, and that materials have already been written to support a one world religion where they bring all the deities of all the world religions together and as all equal. Okay? So they're bringing Yeshua, the Messiah, down to just a prophet. It's not going to work, And so they're blending Christianity and Islam together, and all the books have been written for all the doctrines. They're ready to hand this stuff out. Okay? And the problem, the fact is that people are ready for something that's going to give them some type of peace and hope in the world. I don't know names of people that are representing the different, I don't. I certainly, if I was ever invited, which I would never be, but I certainly couldn't be part of something where a bunch of pagans are gathering around to worship and to pray. No way. Because that's not to the King of the universe. But they're trying to put the King of the universe in level playing fields with all of these false gods. So they are there to cultivate and to evoke an ancient power. So expect things that are going to take place. And here's the next thing. Here's an expectation, because they've been planning this and they've been working on it for a number of years. Remember all these movies and shows and TV things that they have that speak about the paranormal? It is all about the preparation of the heart so that the people will not be so surprised when the paranormal becomes normal. Don't be surprised. These things are taking place. So that's going on there. Here's something else that's happened, because this is kind of weird. In Australia, they had to change the cameras and change out the chips in these cameras because the cameras, they have lots of thunderstorms and stuff over there. So they have all these cameras that they can watch and monitor and that type of thing. And these cameras were picking up these triangular portals opening up in the sky during these storms. So they had to go through and all these cameras and change out the chip to put in digital filters so they would not be showing up on the cameras. Apple, on the latest Apple iPhone, they actually also put the filter into that phone so that you can't be taking a picture or video of something that might happen to pick up another dimensional entity or opening or something like that. Isn't this interesting? These are just some things that are happening. Okay, the next thing is, and that has to do with Planet 7X. The thought is right now is that it's actually much closer than they originally thought. Of course, time will tell, but I'm reporting that it's much closer than what we thought. So Gil Broussard has been talking that it will show up during the time of Passover, and he's still thinking that right now it's going to be this Passover. this Passover, the planet 7X is also known as the Destroyer. Now, Mike from Around the World, when he was talking about this the other night on Paul Begley's show, he was saying he has seen it, and he said he's seen it multiple times, and the first time that he saw it, because he's only alluded to it, he talks so cryptically, but he says we're going through a debris field, and he's been talking about the debris field. That is, this debris field's huge, it's long, it's wide, and it's going to take a long time to go through it, like years, to go through this debris field. And we have been going through debris. It's just we just haven't been having the hits like they originally thought we would be having. And he said that the first time he saw it, he said he fainted. He said there was such fear when he looked at it because he says it's not like looking at a planet like Jupiter or Saturn or something like that through a telescope. He says when he saw it, he said it was as if it was alive and it was looking back at him. And he wasn't expecting it. He says, nobody knows fear. He says it's like he's like your brain gets completely separated from the body. And he said he fainted the first time he saw it because he wasn't prepared to see it. But he says you can't unsee something like that. And so it's totally changed his outlook on things. This is why would this thing be coming? It's called the Destroyer. Well, it was used, if you following what Gil Broussard said, it's been used many different times during the history, possibly during the time of Noah, during the time of the Greater Exodus, during that type of thing. So he says it's coming. It's really close. We're going to wait and see, okay? Why do we have the lockdowns then? And they're expecting new lockdowns to take place. Why are they bringing out new lockdowns? Why are they saying that there's going to be a worse disease that's going to be released on the earth that's coming this year? Why is that going to happen? Because they need to have martial law and they need to have people controlled and to keep them in their homes because this thing is going to cause men's hearts to fail for fear of the things that are coming upon the earth. So keep this in mind, how these are working out. Well, what are some other things that are taking place with the incoming Planet 7X? And what's happening to the sun, it's causing climate change. It has nothing to do with man-made biofuels or carbon dioxide or anything like that. It's affecting our earth and the production of food. When we were talking about famine is taking place right now. They cannot produce enough. What they're growing is getting destroyed through the floods, through the winter storms, through the winds, a lot drought, all these different things. So the food chain is breaking down. They're running out, and this year could be very telling for us. So right now, I mean, I've gone to United. I don't know if you ever see it. I get Nature's Own bread. Nature's Own, when I've gone to look for it on 2 different occasions in 1 week, was empty. You get Mrs. Baird's, but they were empty. That means they were having some type of supply chain and delivery problem getting the bread to the store. Now, in Amarillo right now, we've been doing pretty good with food on the shelves. I keep seeing it, but I keep hearing rumors in other places, in other cities, they're not having the food supplies like we're having here. So, pay attention to that. Here's the next thing, because what's happening to this system coming in, it's affecting the sun. The sun activity is at is very low right now, as we're in a minimum. And so what happens during that cycle of the sun is that we get colds. So we had some tremendous cold this year, right? We had some different things that are affecting us here in the northern hemisphere, but it causes radical climate differences. So we can have some extremely hot times during the summertime coming up and drought season coming up. So pay attention to this. But what's happening to the sun with the activity on the sun is sending forth these coronal mass ejections, which is they continue to happen, plus the energy that's coming from outside of the solar system, not from the sun, and it's collapsing our magnetic field. You've heard me talk about this before, but in the collapsing of the magnetic field, that's our protection. When it collapses, it pushes the jet stream closer to the Earth, which brings about higher winds on the surface. Now, we know about high winds in Amarillo because at 3,500 feet, a lot of times those jet streams do get kind of low, and we get a lot of high winds around here. But that's what happened last summer when Nebraska, Iowa, all the way to Indiana got hit with those land hurricanes, those derechoes, and that's from the pressure being pushed down on the earth. So this is taking place, but it's also causing the magnetic poles to begin to really move, and they are really thinking that we could have a magnetic pole shift, which in its, well, I don't know if it means a planetary change as much as the poles magnetically flip. Like on a magnet, you can make a magnet poles flip from one side to the other with a certain energy placed upon it. Well, this is what they're thinking is going to happen to the earth, but it will cause great climate, environmental, apocalyptic type events. So just be aware. Why am I saying all this? It's like, I'm not trying to say this to scare anybody, but I'm saying, look at the time we're living in. This is how it's all playing out. So, all right, so I'm just going to bring up one other thing, and that has to do with the meteors, and that the meteors are lining up. We just had an impact over in Sweden just a day or so ago. Did y'all hear about that? There was an impact in Sweden. There was one that blew up over Canada. There was another one that just passed through recently, but the frequency of these meteors are coming in. And so they didn't happen like we thought last year, but we should be keeping an eye on that. They're also saying that they should expect more in May and September this year to a greater volume than what we saw this past year. We dodged a lot. Let me just say it. We dodged a lot this past year. So I wanted to bring this out. I wanted to talk about it kind of here at the end, because we can cut this off for the DVD that's being made for the inmates. But, I want to bring this out. This has to do with war. So when there's famine and these events that are going on with the sun, these moderate minimums, what looks like a cooling off, and it looks like it's going to affect our climate that way, this is the time that historically there's been wars on the earth. And now that President Trump has been off to the side, he's been sidelined, and we've got Biden in there, all of a sudden everything's ramped up. And if you have been paying attention, this last week, we stepped up our bombing of Syria again. And we were bombing some Iranian installations, and that happened about 2 or 3 days ago, and then also last night or this morning. They did some more bombing rounds in Syria. But what Russia sent, they've been stepping up. They've been extending their airfields in Syria, and they've been sending equipment and supplies and people to Syria because they're setting up to counter against the United States and NATO. NATO and the United States are building up troops once again in Iraq and in Syria. So it looks like we're going to have a conflict. But what is something else that happened today is that Riyadh in Saudi Arabia was also bombed. They came under some type of missile strikes. So probably from Iran or a country that works with Iran. But we need to also be looking at that Saudi Arabia could therefore be going to war. This thing could become more than just regional very quickly. Why is that important? Well, there's been more naval activity and buildup in the South China Sea by the Chinese than at any other time in history. Why? Because they're looking to take control of all of that area in the South Pacific. Guess what else is happening in Ukraine? Well, Ukraine hasn't been in the news for 4 years. But what's happened now is Russia is sending troops and heavy equipment to their border with Ukraine, and also into the two provinces of Ukraine. One of them is Donetsk, and the other one begins with an L. These places, these two provinces in Ukraine want to separate and join Russia. And now Ukraine is joining together with NATO, and NATO is sending troops to Ukraine. So now we have another regional conflict besides the Middle East. We've got it going on in Ukraine once again. What does that mean? This is what I'm watching. This is what I'm paying attention to, is because the United States is the heavy hitter, the heavy military presence in the world. is that attack comes to the United States. Because in order to take out the ability of the power and the strength of the United States in those areas, then you have to take out the strength of the United States at our home. Because if they can shatter us here, there'll not be a threat over there. So I just wanted to say, pay attention, because when this war comes, this could very well be called the War of Gog-Magog, and it precedes the Great Tribulation. It must precede the Great Tribulation. And if we look at the timeline of things, how God always does things on feast days, then if Passover this year would begin the Great Tribulation,
First or second.
or possibly the second Passover, because we were looking at that as well, then the War of Gog-Magog could be happening soon, very soon, because in 3 weeks is Passover. So just see how these things are playing out. Am I saying, is this going to happen? No. We're saying, okay, if we're looking at these biblical timelines of things and these events that are taking place, it's a possibility that they could take place now. So that's why I'm saying that here, what is it about Revelation 12? The woman in travail. What is being birthed? Gil Broussard said what happened in September of 2017 may not have been the woman in travail, because instead of Jupiter passing through Virgo, the Virgin, it might be planet 7X passing through. And he said that the time that would take place could only be in the spring of 2021. That it'll pass through the constellation. Y'all, do you see where we're living right now? Do you see how all these different things that Yahweh could use for us, for our benefit, but to cause us to fast and pray? To actually get us out of, honestly, we are in lethargy. We're apathetic. We really have saying, I'm a believer, and we're just going through life, and we really haven't we take things seriously. But think about this. If this is the time, these are the things that the Father's going to use for us, because He really does care for us. It's for our welfare, but it is so that He will use to restore our fortunes and restore us to the lands from the four corners of the earth. Amen? Right. All right. So that's what I want to say about that. And let's be dismissed. Father, we come before you in the name of Yeshua. We thank you for this time. We thank you for the opportunity just to look at your word and look at these amazing things, Father, so we can check our hearts, so we can prepare our hearts, so that we can be ready. Because, Father, we look forward to your great appearance and to be gathered together with you in that secret place. Father, we just bless you and we thank you. We honor you in the name of Yeshua. Amen.